Hello and welcome to this session, this 1 hour session about game learning analytics, where we'll be talking about a specific niche related to the application of artificial intelligence to education. In this case, we'll be looking at how we can employ games and game playing as part of intelligent teaching tools that we can use to assist educators, but more strongly assist learners in their educational process. So during today's session, I'll be doing and talking about a number of things, but mainly what you will be getting out of the session is a number of things as well. So first of all, I want to define what analytics or learning analytics are. Obviously, it has to do with data, collection of data, and analyzing that data automatically by computerized programs, or what we call algorithms. More clearly, or more specifically, we call them machine learning algorithms, and how these are related in some way to game-based learning. So obviously, we're applying the processing of data gathered during an educational process. In this case, would be a game-based learning process, and use it to assist the same gamer, or the same, in this case, student, and the educator accompanying him or her. Another thing I would like to do is talk about and recognize what are the benefits of applying such analytics during games. How can we use this extracted data? It's what we used to call data mining, because we have an amount of data being gathered while the student is playing a game, and use this data to extract more information, more knowledge about that same student. Obviously, to use it to improve the process, the educational process. A third thing I would like to do is to talk about different ways and identify different ways of how learning analytics can be applied. So we'll be talking about 4 different ways of how learning analytics can be used during this process, including gaming analytics, or game learning analytics. Finally, I would like to discuss how such smart applications or intelligent games can assist the educator, as I already mentioned, to keep track of their students or of the gamer's progress as they play an educational game as part of their curriculum. And obviously, after discussing these possible ways of doing it, we'll look at the potential connotations, educational connotations, that we can extract from all of this. So it's bound to be an interesting session, where we obviously use games, but not for the gaming experience in itself, but to acquire, extract, gain information about the gamer as it sheds light on his or her educational process or academic portfolio. So right off, this is part of AI in education. So you can see in my slide at the very bottom, this is about applying artificial intelligence, because we're using an automated process, an automated computer program, to tell us something new, tell us something useful in the education process. So it is referred to as AI in education. But more specifically, as the title mentions itself, it's about looking at the specific analytics or the analysis of data related to a student's activities while playing a game. Okay. As you can see at the center of this, as I already said, we'll be defining learning analytics at one point. We'll be applying learning analytics, and also looking at the benefits and advantages. So that is the sort of outline of today's lecture. On the outline, on the circumference of this slide, you can see a quote by Duval, 2012, where he specifically mentions learning analytics, and which is about collecting traces that learners leave behind and using those to improve learning. So obviously, in this case, we're looking at the traces a gamer and a student leaves behind while he or she are playing an educational game, and we extract that information, collect the data, which is big data in itself, to extract new information about the student and about the learning process, simply to improve it. So looking at the bigger picture, I'll be talking about these three things. First, obviously, I want to quickly run through into how can games be employed. Then I would like to look a bit into skills acquired during gaming. So, slightly focus on gaming on its own, but then go back to the top circle and look at educational games and the data we can extract about the students during this process. Good, so right off on the first one, and looking at how games can be employed. So obviously, looking at the practical side or the real scenarios of where students, doesn't have to be young students, could be adolescents, could be postgraduate students, but they also could be elders and third age students, older people who obviously play games. Obviously, games are not reserved for children only or for men only. Games are very popular with anybody. So why not use this medium to learn something about the gamers themselves, and eventually use AI to extract information and apply it to an educational setting. So this is the idea. So for those students who are in primary schools, they play games. Students in secondary schools, students at university, students in postgrad, students who grew older. Obviously, we can use the same real scenario from a practical point of view and use the information we extract to help them in their future learning process. Obviously, recognizing the benefits of employing sort of technology enhanced methods is very important. Not everybody in the teaching profession adopts and employs technology enhanced methodologies. Obviously, even when they prepare their own lectures or their own lessons, educators are following a pedagogy, which is a way of teaching. So if they want to include technology enhanced methodologies in their pedagogical plans of the way they teach, they can also include games as part of it. We know that games could be fun. That majority of people enjoy playing games. Some people do not enjoy games, but in their majority, students, especially from a young age, enjoy playing a game. And so we can use that experience to instill some knowledge. Obviously, we can include games as part of our pedagogy while we teach, because simply we recognize the benefits out of it. So technologies, which we call Web 2.0, which was the second generation web, we use different ways, just like social media or other applications online where students can interact with the interface, especially online. These can assist both the educator, the teacher, but also the learner, the students. So in this way, it is very important to recognize that the applications or the apps we use on our phones or on our browsers on a tablet or on a computer, on a laptop, obviously are part of this process. Playing a game in itself is obviously bang on what we're talking about. But sometimes you could have applications that have game theory included or integrated within the application. Just to give you an example, you could be following an educational process, and after a number of courses you're doing, you're given a badge, for example, and you're being part of a league table where you're competing with other students. So automatically, even though it's not a game, we are integrating game theory and game experiences to provide quality education, which is one of the SDGs that obviously we are covering in the project. So obviously, two aspects: a game in itself, but also game theory within an educational application. Okay. Again, employing games to discuss and justify the use of modern engaging technologies, because games are a strong way of how to engage people. As I said, I mentioned social media, but also other applications like VR or virtual reality, as well as obviously the wide variation of different games within a classroom that can be used to facilitate, the tasks that as educators we try to provide to our students. Are there games that are not fully educational? To some extent, I wouldn't say there aren't, because at in any activity you are engaged, you are bound to learn something. Okay, so no, the level of what you're learning could be obviously within a spectrum. So even if it's not a game aimed to educate, still the gamer can realize or learn or acquire some kind of knowledge. It could be perseverance, for example, or ability to investigate, to venture into the environment while using virtual reality or augmented reality, for example. So at some point, I believe that any kind of game, there is an element of knowledge acquisition, which is the process of education. Obviously, when we create an application or a game specifically to pass on specific knowledge, then obviously the amount of educational stuff that is going on within that game is enhanced, and obviously at a bigger percentage. Finally, employing games, we are able to outline and distinguish the different technologies that we employ within the classroom, or within a technology enhanced, using the technology to enhance our classroom, to show obviously that we can use technology to our benefit. I'm gonna define further this. We are using technology or games to enhance not just our experience, but our educational experience. So this is one way of employing games as one of the technologies out of plenty that can be used to assist educators, not just in class, but even beyond the class. So as I said, we can provide quality education, which was the sustainable development goal we had. But secondly, we have no limits, no age, no gender, and no, and no other barriers that limit the way we apply this technology. So gender equality, which is another sustainable development goal we are covering, obviously is maintained when we apply this particular area. Good. So switching to skills that potentially we acquire during gaming. I already mentioned a couple, even when the game is not aimed or designed and developed specifically for education, we can still acquire some skills, let alone when the game and the design was purposely for education. At this point, obviously, the skills we acquired are optimized at a minimum. So obviously, applying AI techniques to generate a specific profile for a specific learner or a specific gamer is what we're talking about. So this is a skill that can be acquired during gaming and which can assist and improve the educational process. So the key word here is learner profile. In computer science, we call it user profile, depending on the user. So if we're talking about a game, we're talking that the user is a gamer, so a gamer profile. If we're talking about a student or a learner, we're talking about a student profile or a learner profile. In this case, if the gamer is the learner, obviously, we're talking about a combined profile of a learner who is involved or is engaged in a process of a game. Once we have a student using a specific game aimed at extracting information, we need to first capture that information. So anything the student or the gamer is doing is being logged automatically. Whatever the student does, which rooms visited, which keys are pressed, what activities, what events are happening, what has been acquired, which goals have been reached during the game are all saved. And this is the reason why I mentioned this is part of big data, because loads and loads of data, masses of data being generated and collected every second. And this doesn't go to waste. This is being used to be processed, examined, interpreted. So we're interpreting the analytics collected, or we call them learning analytics, and apply them to other academic situations. So once we collect the data, while the student is playing a game, we can figure out what the student is like and use this information in another class or in another topic or subject, for example, which doesn't have to be necessarily a game. So we're learning stuff about a learner. When I say stuff, the characteristics, the attributes, the likes, the interests, the traits, and so on about this particular user, and then use them to his or her advantage, because we know this particular student likes sports, likes playing games in the afternoon, so it must be an ideal time, and enjoys adventure games. So why not use this information to be able to apply it to a similar scenario when we teach mathematics, for example? Okay, so this is the idea of creating a learner profile or a gamer profile out of the massive amounts of data that has been collected during the game playing, also called game analytics. So we employ software development skills to design and build prototype artifacts, prototype software, prototype applications that employ such techniques and eventually use them to create, design, and develop other software or other technology enhanced systems to help the student learn furthermore or improve his or her academic process. We can also obviously use the learner profile to recommend the use of other techniques or technologies or technology enhanced techniques within any educational scenario. I mentioned mathematics, but it could be used to teach history to the student who likes sports. We figured out that the student likes sports and action games. So let's use that information that we extracted while he or she were playing a game, to teach history, to teach a language, for example, using examples from the likes and interests of this particular student, just to give a concrete example. And finally, another skill acquired through generating a learner profile is to interpret and evaluate related artificial intelligence educational literature to present and defend personal opinions and interpretations. So obviously we're using the information we gathered to be able to make sense of other educational scenarios that become available or need to be done. So to summarize this slide, what I'm saying is we're using games and the experience or the process or the event of a student playing a game to extract data, process the data, and figure out stuff, which I'm calling a learner profile, not just stuff, about this particular learner. As an example, I mentioned the likes, the interests, the needs of this particular student. Knowing that will help us to design, to develop, to test, and to make sense out of any other educational scenarios. And I mentioned mathematics, languages, history, religion, whatever, you know. Each one of us has a different way of learning because we have different interests. We might have similar interests, but at some point we're going to differ. So if we have 3 students in a small class, these 3 students have different needs, academic needs. They have different interests. We're talking about 3, not 30, let alone 30, you know. So how could a teacher, an educator, target exactly the needs and interests of each of the 30 students? Even it is hard to do it in a small scale with 3 students. So we use the software, we use technology enhanced software, we use artificial intelligence techniques or machine learning techniques to learn about this specific student out of all the 30, what he or she likes, what he or she needs, what he or she is interested in through a game, and use that to teach other topics. So this is a very important skill that can be acquired during gaming. More specifically, obviously, I want to go into the topic I'm talking about, which is learning analytics based on games, obviously, extracted from games. So now, very specifically, I'm going to define them. I'm going to see how we can apply them. I mentioned there are 4 ways. And finally, I will look at benefits and advantages of using analytics that we extracted from game playing to an educational scenario. And then I'll close this class with a final slide of looking at issues related, even though I'm not mentioning them there, but I would like to discuss any issues related to applying games or learning analytics extracted from games to the educational process. So first off, we go to the defining. So what are learning analytics? So there are 4 levels, as I mentioned before, of learning analytics. We can specify them out of this graphic that I borrowed from the web. And they are descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. These 4 levels of learning analytics, which are sort of incremental and sequential, you can see that it's not a simple concept of using learning analytics. The first one is the descriptive one, saying what has happened. Look at the facts. What has the gamer do during the process of playing the game? What are the facts, figures, and other data that give you a detailed picture of what the student is doing during this game? So it's describing explicitly, you know, because we could log them because the gamer went to the next level, because the gamer covered the second level in a specific number of seconds or time. So they're quite explicitly stated and can log them. So because they describe the process. The second one is the diagnostic, who's trying to figure out why did that happen. Why did the students, for example, while playing a game, follow the specific path, maybe from the knowledge from the first level, for example, or from previous knowledge, because the learner profile listed one skill that this gamer already had. Okay, so examining the stuff that was collected before the descriptive one, what has happened, allows us to critically assess what or why an outcome has happened. So we figure out how come this gamer in particular is proceeding so fast or so slow, for example, because we collected some data from the descriptive point, and now we can make sense out of it. Okay, so what has happened. Second one was why did it happen. The third one is predictive, what will happen. And you can see now the intelligent aspect coming through, because usually software captures and not even tries to justify it, but taking it a step further and trying to figure out what will happen in the future is artificial intelligence. So given the same or different elements, even the same or different scenario in the next level or in the next class of another topic, what would the outcome be? How can we figure out how the student will perform? Do we need to recommend the student to do a revision or repeat the class? Do we want the gamer to repeat the level because he or she didn't achieve the goals in a specific time? So you can see the predictive is preparing the gamer, the learner, for future tasks. They could be a level in a game, but they could be obviously the next chapter in their education. And finally, prescriptive. What should I do? How can a specific outcome be achieved through the use of specific elements? So obviously, we are trying to see what will happen, but we could also prescribe what to do. As I said, do we ask the gamer to repeat the level? Do we ask the student to go back to exercise 2 and repeat it, to be well prepared for level 3, for example? So you can see that these 4 levels are building on top of each other, but at the end of the day, they are doing something which usually requires a human to do. And this is the definition of artificial intelligence. Okay, when we talk about skills or activities or tasks that usually require a human to do, then that is artificial intelligence, because we have the software doing that kind of work. So again, we can log and describe specifically what has happened during a game or during a learning process. You can see, you can watch me do this this narration twice for a game and for educational process, because they could be one and the same thing. So we can describe in a descriptive way what has happened. Then secondly, we can look and try to justify why did this happen, which is the diagnostic part. Thirdly, we can try to predict what will happen, which is the predictive step. And we actually can prescribe what to do to reach the ideal goal, which, for a gamer is achieving and scoring high. For a learner is to acquire the knowledge and master the information. So there you go, having the 2 worlds of gaming and education integrated together using these 4 levels of learning analytics. So that was the first aspect, and looking at and trying to define learning analytics. So let's look at now applying these learning analytics. So actually, before that, I'll go to benefits later. Okay, let me go to apply first, as I said. So applying learning analytics process, you can see, as I mentioned initially in the class, is a process that is happening. We're collecting the data, we're analyzing it, processing it, figuring out or extracting other information out of that same data. So the center of the slide, analyze, is quite complex. It's not just thinking about it and analyzing it, extracting and mining. Mining means getting out of it new information is something that humans do, but we have software to do it. That's why I call it machine learning software or machine learning algorithms in AI, because it uses the data you collected to teach itself on how, that's why it's machine learning, to teach itself on how to intervene, which is the third step, okay? So within this diagram, you can see where the descriptive is, which was, one of the steps for learning analytics, the predictive as well. Obviously, we're leaving the prescriptive because these two are the most important in the analysis stage. So when we collect, and there is an example that somebody, for example, accessed the forum or passed an assessment in education. In gaming, it would be sometimes somebody who achieved a specific level or acquired some kind of tool or broke a record or achieved a specific task during the game, which could be obviously part of the acting within that game. So this is collecting data. To remind you what I initially said, any event, any activity, any task that is performed by the gamer or the student or the learner is being tracked and logged. So anything that happens, it's being logged. This, as I said, involves a lot of data, masses of data being collected every second, because we want to capture a full picture of what the gamer or the learner is doing. Why? Then we can analyze it. So this data is fed into, as input into a computer program, an AI program, a machine learning program, to be able to figure out what is happening, the descriptive. Something like 76% of students have watched the module introduction video. So what does this tell us? But we know that 76% exactly. It could be 85% of the gamers did not succeed level 1 on first try. That could be a descriptive one. Or we could say that 20% of the gamers managed to beat the initial or go through the first obstacle at level 2, for example. And something else which could be not so interesting, but we could figure out, for example, how many students at what age, what gender, and the way they perform during a game, for example, to figure out what is happening while they play the game, which could be significant when we want to intervene. Predictive, 11% of school students are at risk of withdrawal in year 1. So this is predicting out of what has been described. It could be stated in game terminology, for example, figuring out that since at 85% of the gamers did not go through level 1, probably on the first try, they will manage and predict that they'll do it on level 3, all of them, but these 80%, for example, half of them will not manage to ever go beyond level 3, for example, okay? So that will be predictive. So how can we intervene? How can we increase the chances of these gamers being successful? The connotations are, how can we intervene to increase the chances of these students to be successful in their academic journey? First of all, obviously, you can determine if intervention is required. We're talking about software more than human, but you can obviously dialogue between students and staff at all levels, but literally the software itself can intervene by recommending or suggesting, for example, repeating a particular course or repeating a particular assessment, or in gamers repeating a particular level, or recommending some training at a particular skill which you will need at level 2. so that you go through. Or if you haven't managed to go past level 1 on your third time, obviously you need additional help. So it might provide a side skill training in gamers terms, so that they can go on their fourth or fifth level, because it could be quite discouraging not being able to go past level 1. So obviously the game itself would or the software within the game would intervene. But what does this tell us about that particular learner who did not, give up after the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th? Perseverance is for sure for this particular gamer, which could show a particular attribute for this student when he or she are trying to learn a particular concept in class and is not managing, because during the assessment this is showing up. So obviously it tells us a lot, and this is what I mean when creating a learner profile through the use of games. Okay, so quite interesting this learning analytics process, keeping in mind the previous 4 steps that learning analytics through games can be used. Let me try and go back and go for the benefits of learning analytics. Okay, I highlighted a lot of them, but in this particular slide, I would like to, focus on what data extracted from the use of a game can do. So, for example, we can create a more structured and effective intervention to improve student outcomes. So, the intervention stage that we spoke about earlier, which is this one over here. We have the 4th one, which is the prescriptive. What should I do? That would be obviously an advantage, because we can recommend, suggest to that particular student what to do to improve the outcome. This recommending, the suggestion, again, is the intelligent part out of all this process. Okay, similar to what Amazon does when they recommend books, similar to what Netflix does when they recommend movies that you might like, and similar to what Google and Gmail does, recommending adverts, or Facebook or other social media do. They are recommending, suggesting what the software thinks that would fit your profile. The same thing we're doing over here, but within an educational process. So we're creating more structured and very targeted interventions based on what we extracted, based on the data extracted from playing a simple game or a complex game. Why? To improve, obviously, the academic process, or improve the student outcome, which obviously and hopefully is good marks and progress in the educational process. It also provides data to understand the workload planning. So how do we plan the curriculum, or how do we plan the program for this particular student? Did we learn something and created a profile that tells us gives us some information about this particular student? Remember the 3 students. One of the students was good in maths, the second student was good in languages, and the third student was good in mechanical skills, So we have 3 students attending the same class. Again, not to mention 30, I'm just mentioning 3 students, which have a different kind of interest, a different set of skills, different from each other, and yet they are going through the same class. And as educators, or as an educational process, they are expected to be assessed, examined in the same way. When we clearly know, I just stated that they have 3 different ways of dealing with things. So obviously, if I'm going to teach a bit of mathematics, useless explaining to the first student who's really good at mathematics basic concepts that the second student who is more into languages needs. The third student might be good in mathematics, not as the first one, but is good also, obviously, in using mathematics for doing particular skills. When it comes to languages, obviously, and describing something, the second student has an advantage. So you can see when I'm planning the curriculum, when I'm planning the program for a particular student, I keep in mind the specific needs, the customized needs of that specific student. Can we do it in class? It's practically impossible, not with 3 students, with 30 students or more students, like we do in massive open online courses we call MOOCs. So we need the software, we need this intelligent, artificially intelligent software, which was developed and programmed purposely to create a workload, and the workload could be, as I said, a particular educational program, but it could also be a particular process during a game. Okay, what is nice when you play an intelligent or a smart game is that every time you start the game, you do not want the game to go through the same steps because you get used to it, you know, because that's not what happens when we play human opponents, because we learn from each other. So if I am playing a game of chess against you, automatically after 3 or 4 matches, we have got used to each other, and I can figure out the way you do your opening of the game and the way I defend myself or the way you defend yourself. So I'm going to change, I'm going to evolve as the time goes by on the 5th game, on the 6th game, and that's what happens in real life, even in not just games, even in a battle, for example, let alone a simple game. But we want the software to do this. So obviously, figuring out what to do during a particular game can be planned according to the needs, interests, and skills of that particular gamer or learner. The data can also provide added value over time through student tracking. So what means student tracking is we keep logging information about that student or about that gamer. We created a profile, but that's not enough. We want to refine it. We want it to evolve as time goes by because we all change over time. So as a student or as a gamer, playing the same game over and over again, over a month, obviously I get better, but the software is figuring out how to change the game itself to reflect my growing and evolving skills. Same thing with education. You can use this information that we extracted from the game and growing knowledge and the enhanced skills I am gaining through the game to reflect on what to present to the same student during a particular subject course, for example. This helps in the 4th one as well, improve support and target training workshops. So literally improve support, meaning how can we address the specific needs of student 1 who was not so good in languages? How can we enhance the second student's mathematical abilities? And how can we use both of them to teach the 3rd student who is more mechanically inclined, how to value languages and mathematics, for example. So obviously, improving the support, not just for a learner or for a gamer, is part of a teacher's task. But if we have the software to do it, because the software is learning as it goes by, then the software itself can prescribe to intervene as required. So this is the idea we got from the previous slides as well. How to do it? By identifying, which is the 5th point over there, identifying really specific strategies or ways or methods or techniques which are successful with a particular student. So that, you know, the teaching process, it says over here, evaluate teacher effectiveness, but actually so that the teaching process is more effective. If the teaching process or the learning process is more effective, then the learner is gaining out of it. So this is the added value we spoke about in the third point over here. So literally, the data we collected, the data we're collecting from a game or from an educational game is being used, not just to understand what is happening, but to apply it to future educational events and improve the support, improve the delivery, but also to use it to figure out which best ways to use to teach this particular student. Just to give you an example, one student prefers to study using a lot of examples and visual aids, images, diagrams, videos. Okay, this particular strategy, this is a strategy, a way of teaching, a pedagogy. This particular student prefers this kind of medium. So obviously the software will figure out, or the teacher will figure out, that this particular student is better off learning this same topic using a YouTube video, for example. The second student, who is more into languages, prefers reading about it rather than watching a video. So there you have it. We're trying to achieve the same educational goal using a different methodology. At the end of the day, what we want is to transfer or to communicate this knowledge to the students in the best way we can, depending on this each particular student. Okay, so if the first one prefers images and video, the second one prefers reading about it, and maybe the third one likes a mix of both, which is usually the case, then obviously we can adjust the specific strategy so that it is more effective with that particular student. So last point, just to reiterate what I've been saying, the strategy and the planning involved to be more successful while teaching can be not just guessed by the teacher. No, the software will try to match it exactly. Okay, matching is also something which is usually done by humans, matched exactly to the specific student. We call this personalization, tailoring, customization. That's what we call it. It happens in a lot of areas, but obviously if it happens within an educational process, then it helps assist and improves that educational process even more. Okay, so we have seen these three aspects, we defined them, we applied them, and we've seen the benefits and advantages. Obviously, it's going to go to the slide we already seen, but eventually I would like to close this this session we had, which was very interesting, about applying game theory and the game activities into extracting data, masses of data, to an educational domain, what we call learning analytics. And in this graphic that, again, borrowed off the web, I didn't do it myself because there's plenty of information out there. It's by Doyle from 1977, so it's quite old, but you know, it's bang on. As I said, over here, I want to talk about, more than anything, about issues related. So this should be about issues, okay, related to analytics. As I said, at the very center, you have this personalization happening, okay, where we target whatever we are discovering about a particular gamer to create a profile specific. Okay, a profile is a description of a person, in this case, a gamer or a learner, or gamer slash learner. The main issue with this thing is usually the ethical issues, and usually, especially with vulnerable students, don't have to be young students, but it could be anybody, any gamer who does not realize that the system is monitoring the activities happening at the back. Okay, it's very important that if we use AI techniques in any of our software, the end user, who could be the gamer, who could be the learner, who could be the educator, is well aware that this is happening. Okay, so if it's a very young student, we have obviously the guardian or the parents who are aware, and they allow it because they know what is good or bad for their child. But if it's adults, obviously they need to be aware of this happening, because the data is very personal, as I said, personalization. So we need to ensure that the software is being used for the best interest of that particular learner or gamer. Yes, learning analytics, as you can see at the very top of the slide, is used to target advertising. So it's used in business intelligence, of course, and it's used obviously to try and sell products related to the needs or the interests of that particular person. So as I said, if the first person is into sports, while the second person is more into the arts, for example, and the third person is more into crafts, then we can, as a company, we can target specific advertising that our sponsors are giving us to these specific students. Okay, it's useless offering something which is artistic, for example, books, music, to the first user who is more into sports, while it's useless trying to sell tickets for a soccer match to the second person who is more into the arts, who'd rather go to the cinema or to the theater, for example. So it's just a simple example, okay, of what can happen. And if you do not realize that this can be happening, which is happening when we access social media, when we access our email, that the software is tracking what we're doing, what we're viewing, sometimes what we're saying, and what we're writing, so that it obviously targets our needs through advertising. Then it depends on us, on how strong we are, on how actually we need products or not. But to show you the ethical connotations of using data about a person, okay? It could be quite sensitive. This is the driver. It could be quite sensitive. As I said, it involves accumulation of big data itself, as well as, it could be used to adapt, customize the learning process or the gaming experience specifically for that individual student. Okay, so this brings me back to the bigger picture, and I want to resummarize what I've been talking about in this lecture. And basically, it looks like a process, okay? This is the reason why I defined it first. I defined what learning analytics are and how we can apply them, because I believe, usually others believe as well, that there are advantages and benefits to extract from using data about a person. This is nothing new, because people do this continuously. Once I have information or data about a particular person, and I know what that person needs, or that person interests are, or what knowledge this person needs, or where this person needs more help or more retraining, for example, and then I can help this particular person as an educator even more. The idea, as I said, we assume this to be done by teachers in class, because they have a clue when they interact with the students. It's not so easily done with 30 students, even though it's done to a certain extent, but to be done properly, it has to be done much more focused on each particular student. Ideally, each student has one teacher, so we have a class of 30, we have 30 teachers, which is not that feasible, I know, but this is the idea of replacing each individual teacher for each individual student with sustaining software, not to replace the teacher, but to assist, help, empower the teacher, the educator, to help the student even more. So this is very important. The analytics gathered from games and applied to education are not to replace educators in no way. They are another tool that the educator can use to assist the educational process. As if that is clear, then you got the message right. So once the data is being collected through events, it could be a student, as I said, using a virtual learning environment like the VLE, or a student using a piece of software, an application, or the application could be a game. But we're using the game as an excuse, or the game-based learning application as an excuse to gather information, to collect information, to put together intelligence about this particular person, gamer. We use this data. When I say use, process it, go through it, pass it through an algorithm, figuring out what are the specific traits, what are the specific things this particular person likes, what are the best skills, what are the lacking skills, what is the knowledge as far as we know that this particular gamer has, what gaps in his or her knowledge we can identify. So once we have that information, then we can go a step further, the intelligent step, which was the predictive part, and the prescriptive part. Predictive is saying, if we do this, then something is going to happen. So let's recommend something else. And this is the intelligent part of using learning analytics through a game or a game-based application, so that we can help assist the student, the same gamer, in his or her future educational process. So this is the whole idea behind this class for today. As I said, if you read Duval's definition, it now makes more sense. Learning analytics is about collecting traces, and traces could be anything. Okay, traces could be the clicks, the achievements, the failures. Those are all traces that a gamer or a learner leaves behind, and using these traces, this information, to improve learning or the educational process. Thank you very much for your attention. As I said, the game-based learning is a massive domain, and using the use of games as part or as a tool within teaching, like an intelligent teaching tool, obviously we're making use of what students or of what people like doing best, usually playing games, to help them in their educational process. Thank you very much and have a nice day.